the connection between past protection leading us to future preparation. Paul's saying, here's what you do now. Live in the daylight. Don't be asleep. Be sober. And he says, verse 8, having, he shifts the verb, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, for a helmet, the hope of salvation. There's something you have already done. When you obeyed Christ, when He saved you, you, quote, put on this armor. So this is a condensed version of what he would talk about in Ephesians chapter 6 with the armor of God there. We must keep going back to what have we done? What is it that keeps protecting us, that thus keeps preparing us? Look at the three things: faith, hope, and love. Paul said about those in 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 13, they are things that abide and last. They keep on lasting. So what three things will prepare and protect our hearts and our minds until the return of Christ? Things that last. Faith, love, connected to the breastplate there, our hearts, and that of hope, which protects our minds. So as we are assessing our daily preparation, am I living in view of this certain return, even though I don't know its timing? We draw back to, we keep going back to our faith, our hope, and our love. How are those holding up? We must protect our hearts. That's the important role of the breastplate. Proverbs 4 and verse 23, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. All that we do comes from our hearts. If our hearts are ill-equipped, if they're unprotected, then our whole body is unprotected. Romans chapter 3 talks about our minds and hope. Verse 3, we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing. We're able to rejoice in the midst of sufferings, knowing something, thinking through something, being reminded of something. That suffering produces endurance. Endurance produces character. Character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, or hope does not disappoint. It doesn't leave us empty-handed. You know, when we kind of decide the expectations on our own, we get in our minds, well, I think this is what this should be, or how this could be. We're so often left coming up short with those expectations, are we not? When we decide them. What God is saying is when your expectations are rooted in Him, the character and the endurance that comes from suffering for Him, the hope that's built will not leave you unfulfilled. It will not leave you empty-handed. It does not disappoint. Here's why. Because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. This goes back to the day in which we were saved. We obeyed Christ. The way He saves us and what He keeps giving us is protection that leads to preparation for the future. Notice how strong of a contrast this is to the world's thinking. If we ask the random person on the street, what does it mean to live a hopeful life? 1L, H-O-P-E-F-U-L, 1L. What does it mean to live a hopeful life? It wouldn't take long at all to hear, well, trust your gut, trust your mind, trust your heart, follow your passions, follow your heart. It's the opposite of what Paul's saying. Paul's saying you keep drawing back on the things that come from God. You protect your heart. You keep changing your heart from the things of God. You keep changing your mind from the things of God. So Proverbs 28 verse 26, for instance, whoever trusts in his own mind is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom will be delivered. There's deliverance, but trusting in ourselves leads to destruction.